Right, we're all sitting comfortably. We are, because we've got sofas and various other things, and we've got pizza, and we've got beer, and everything's really good. I nearly didn't attend tonight, but I said that, I promised Hendrik I would, but purely because the university's migration research group were running an event tonight, and they said, oh, there's a wine buffet up the smell. They told me you got me in. My name's Michael Soper. I've worked for Cambridgeshire County Council since about 1998-97, so long ago when I joined the County Council, I can't remember exactly when it was. I've always worked in local government since I left university way back in 1994. For my sins, I studied human geography at university, and I consider myself to be a geographer and a social researcher primarily, and I just happen to do that sort of work within a local government context. My colleague here, Hendrik, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Hendrik Grothuis. I work with Mike in the Cambridge Research Group, and I've worked for the council since 2002, so again, quite a long time.
Yeah.
Primarily my remit over the years has been spatial analysis, but also around, one of the reasons I originally got hired was around releasing data on the web. Now that's moved on an awful lot since we started doing it, and traditionally everything is done in formats that people want to actually use visually, such as Excel sheets and nicely formatted with titles and etc. We're trying now to work into a new way of actually data that everyone can use, be that the high end, such as some people that smart cities or make space, but also very importantly our customer base is everyone. So it's the local community group, the armchair auditor, the local schools, universities, etc. So we have to sort of tread that middle ground of not being too advanced, not being less advanced, but actually trying to hit just the sweet spot. And Mike's going to talk about some of it, but we'll see how we're doing.
One of the things I was going to say very positively about mySociety, if you think about something like Fix My Street, you can see where that application has had a very positive influence on local government, on councils, in terms of how they manage their own. You think about potholes, well, there's all sorts of things wrong with it. You think about our own pothole reporting. The fact that something, and I remember, not directly in my line of work, but I remember things like when Fix My Street came along, people going, hey, look at this, you can go online, you can report something, it arrives in my inbox and I have to go and respond to it. We can't do that on our website, but by and large, now we can. We can do a whole load of other stuff on county council websites and the local authority websites. So mySociety and applications like that have been really positive in terms of influencing local government behaviour and how we changed our own reporting systems, how we changed our own accountability. The other, I must say, tribute to Richard a little bit. I mean, Richard's also very active locally in sort of challenging community safety partnerships, police and crime commission, and that sort of thing. And occasionally controversial. Occasionally controversial. But again, some of that has had a very positive influence on our democratic systems as well, particularly sort of campaigns and the right to film and that sort of thing. It's again got us to go back and think about, well, are we actually web streaming our own council meetings and all that side of things. So there are, through things like mySociety and local activism, there are positive influences there. You will also occasionally get some pushback from different organisations. And yes, we do work for Cambridgeshire County Council, and we are talking about our website called Cambridgeshire Insights. What I have to understand is the County Council is a very diverse functioning organisation. It employs around about 6,000 people and falling quite rapidly because of the pressures on the public purse. And we cover a massively diverse range of functions, from fixing potholes to helping children with special educational needs, to providing adult social care, children's social work, trading standards, and you can go on and on. I can't possibly, on my breadth of knowledge, cover all those particular issues. I can talk about what my specialism is, which is around about doing research work. I did a lecture a couple of weeks ago to the Cambridge branch of the Geographical Society, talking about geography of Cambridge and talking to sixth form students in particular about some of the information that we have available, and promoting Cambridgeshire Insight again. And some of the questions that came back from there was about, oh, can you tell me about the Manchester Huntingdon Link Road going through this local nature reserve? And I've heard about it, but I couldn't, I can't quite manage to talk about very coherently about what's happening on that case. But I can always refer people on to somebody who will be able to talk to you about that issue with you. But generally speaking, I think tonight I try and I'm mainly off the clock, I think, and views and opinions are expressed are pretty much my own. We are different as local government officers compared to civil servants. Civil servants are very much obliged to represent the opinion of the government of the time and act very much as a servant of politicians. In terms of being a local government officer, we represent a much broader spectrum of view and opinion, and we represent more the organisation rather than the politics. Anyway, that's a sort of preamble in terms of where we are. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is what we're trying to achieve with Cambridgeshire Insight. We'll talk to a bit about my perspective, our perspective, about where we are with research in local government, with information. Generally it's available to community activists and that sort of thing. In terms of the origins really around Cambridgeshire Insight, when I first started work back in 94, 95 at Hertfordshire County Council, I worked for this guy called Steve Yeomans. Steve really had this view, and we were working at that time on structure planning, pretty much housing allocations, about where the large housing developments will go around the county of Hertfordshire, working on something we call a sustainable structure plan. And we were getting into this, and Steve really said, nothing we do is secret. I was trying to imbibe that to all of us, that nothing we do is secret. And you do have to have this thing about, if you're in a locally accountable organisation, should anything that you do be secret? There's certainly things around data protection, there's certainly things around protecting confidentiality, but nothing around the decision-making process should really be secret. So that's the sort of issue we need to think about. I personally work in social research, and I'll explain a little bit of some of the research we do in a minute, but there is inherent need for people like myself, researchers, to communicate. Because if we don't communicate the work that we've actually done, we won't have any influence. And you wonder why did I do research in the first place if I'm not communicating that. And certainly what we're beginning to do is address the fact that we have a broad audience for the research work that we're doing within Cambridgeshire, about the Cambridgeshire population and so on. We don't necessarily just want to be addressing the narrow audience of decision makers and the decision making process, be that senior managers within the county council, then some councillors, and then we're not going to share anything of our work on a broader footing. And also the way we're thinking about being open and sharing the information that we do have access to is to link as best we can between different agendas. So in terms of thinking about some of the research work that we're actually engaged in and doing, I should come back to that one in a minute. In terms of thinking about the research work we're actually engaging, I've got my own specialism where I've spent many years working for community safety partnerships, analysing crime, antisocial behaviour. I've got colleagues in my team who are working on economic forecasting, and particularly working on something called the Eastern Region Economic Forecasting Model. It's great stuff. I've got people working on doing GIS and mapping, I've got people working on doing strategic housing market needs assessments. There's all sorts of things going on, and we're working for all sorts of different public bodies as well. I'm doing work for Cambridgeshire County Council, I'm doing paid work for Police and Crime Commissioner, paid work for Peterborough City Council, and a whole range of other bodies as well. So there's a lot of stuff that's there, which we want to get out to a bigger audience. There's also a big changing, there has been for a number of years, a changing attitude to accountability, a changing attitude to transparency, and a changing attitude to decision making. I put this source as BBC commentator writing on the Big Society several years ago. That's partly because I took this quote from a slide and I couldn't quite remember where I took the quote from. But again, I try and put a source on this, I'll look it up later. The idea is that accountability won't be driven by opposition politicians, bangocrats, whoever they are, journalists, pressure groups in Westminster, and bangos many of those expensive national bean counters, and maybe I'm a local bean counter, who knows, beavering away to ensure taxpayers' money is being spent effectively. Instead, the idea is that pressure will come from the great British public at a local level to hold public sector organisations to account. But again, in order to hold people to account, you need information. Rich has talked very clearly about information about voting patterns and stuff like that. And you also need access to some of the research figures, some of the information that I have available. Oh, I should have warned you about Jeremy Clarkson's sudden appearance. There is, when you say that, well, actually we're going to rely on the crowd to do all this accountability, there is this dialogue about, can we trust members of the public? And when you work in government, you do have this, can we really trust members of the public to understand everything the way we do, where we've been working on a subject for many, many years. The funny thing, when petitions first went on Number 10, Number 10's website, and so many people signed a petition, then that triggers a debate in Parliament. One of the biggest things on the first week was, we want Jeremy Clarkson for Prime Minister. Is that a good thing? Probably not. No, probably, definitely not. I'm being very facetious. We have to ask there is this question about how much we trust the crowd. Moving on a little bit, from my career as a researcher in local government, there have been some light bulb moments. From a career in anybody's career in research, be it in scientific research and things like that, you could probably, we're in Cambridge, I call them light bulb moments, you could call them Watson and Crick moments, where you've discovered the structure of DNA and you have to rush into the pub. It's an eco light bulb moment in this case. There have been some light bulb moments, but not all that many. Thinking back, there's one or two items I could point to and saying, Hendrik, when we were doing the work on fighting post office changes, reduction in the number of post offices in Cambridgeshire, we did a very good position statement and research document on the need for Cambridgeshire's post offices and how vitally important they were, and we managed to structure our engagement with the post office in the right way to ensure that very far fewer post offices were closed in Cambridgeshire compared to anywhere else in the country. And you can do graphs, a whole separate presentation about how successful we were with that. That's a light bulb moment, because when you think, as a researcher, you think, I did my work, and you know what, I changed the world a little bit. Or I saved the post office. And there's a few... I won't worry about that. There's a 3 or 4 other moments like that. There's a guy from Cardiff University, who's Professor Shepherd, who several years ago realised, because he was a medical professor, that he was looking at facial injuries, and people have been injured by having beer glasses shoved in their faces during fights. And he recording meticulously the detail of these physical injuries and working out that, if you change the composition of beer glass, change the glass composition of beer glass, you can drastically reduce the severity of the injury. And from it's a decent bit of research, take that research to legislators, legislation gets in position, and we change the composition of beer glasses, and probably hundreds and thousands of people have benefited from that piece of research work, because their injuries in pub fights haven't been so bad as they could have been. Now that's a sort of light bulb moment, but to tell the truth, it doesn't happen all that much. Much more about the research process and the information you providing research is a bit like eating carrots. We know it's good for you, we know we're feeding information and research into the policy machine in some way or form, and we're informing the debate, but we're not quite sure what the impact will be, short term, long term, medium term. And that's a little bit about how we're feels like sometimes feeding information into the policy machine. So we're making people eat their cabbage, and we're making elected members eat their cabbage, and senior managers eat their cabbage, and that side of things. To give you an idea in terms of how that actually looks like in more detail, this is adapted from something the Audit Commission did before they were eradicated. They were good for a number of things, the Audit Commission. The idea is, if you want people to make good quality decisions, the good quality decisions require fit-for-purpose information. If you're going to want fit-for-purpose information, and this is what my team spends a lot of our time doing, taking good quality data and turning out information that people can use. You want to have good quality data sources, and you want to move those fit-for-purpose information into the decision-making process. It sounds very good in theory, but then you think about why decisions are made, even on very basic decisions about why somebody would choose to smoke or not. There's massive evidence out there that smoking is really bad for you. People still continue to smoke. That's an analogy, and there's all sorts of good quality information out there to inform decision making, but people may still be contrary and decide something else. And that might be down to past experience, their own political philosophy and background and everything. But I'm in there fighting for the information and the data to be used for decision making, alongside a load of other stuff. Right. We then come into Cambridge Insight. Now, did you want to introduce and talk to people on Cambridge Insight? Are you happy to me to go through that? We could do a website demonstration and click through on the web. Do you want to do that? I don't know what time we'll do it. Now, what we've done is, in terms of Cambridge Insight, in terms of a website, I've talked to you a bit about the philosophy that lays behind it. We're trying to enable people to access and share information and research about Cambridgeshire. And it doesn't necessarily matter that that's information and research produced by Cambridgeshire County Council, produced by any other public sector body really in the local authority area. We're trying to collate as much of that information as possible. At the moment we're fitting that information around what we feel is some key themes, particularly around housing, because housing is such a key issue, particularly around about the pressures on the Cambridge housing market, housing around there, community crime and community safety, picking issues around academic research and economic development and regeneration and that sort of thing. On a very basic level, the website does what every other website does. It allows you to go to find and download reports. That's great. But then what we're trying to do is, if you like, show people the sandpit, if you like, that I get to play in. If you imagine I'm in a sandpit and I'm trying to put together a research report, I've got access to all sorts of different data sets and different sorts of information. And in some ways that's privileged access because I work within government or within local government. And what we're trying to do is, as much as possible, through releasing open data sets and other more collated information in spreadsheet form, is give as many people as possible access to that sandpit, if you like. Does that work as an analogy? I hope it does. But that's what I try and tell people. It's kind of a sandpit approach. Discovering research intelligence for deeper insights about their local area and providing information to act as a valuable planning tool. So who really wants to find out about this? Who really wants to know about what's the crime rate in my local area? What's the population in my local area? How many families with children under 4 are there in Cambridge? All that side of things. Well, we've identified all sorts of people and all sorts of user stories, so people are interested in what we're doing. There's partners and members. These are really people who we've engaged with for years and years. They're not just working for Cambridgeshire County Council, they're working in our partner organisations. But we're using the site to engage with those. That's the kind of tick like we've done there. What we're trying to do as well is push much information out there in the public realm. Explore local information, so people explore local information the way it suits them. We've got this kind of big body here which we call officers, and that officers actually could be anybody trying to do some work as part of their job who wants a little bit of research information to do their job. That could be in a private firm, a public firm, whatever else. And we're beginning to feel about, well, actually are we producing any sort of open data and things and data feeds that we can feed into commercial operations. Now, I don't want to go onto the website and click around and that sort of thing, but if you want to have a look at the site and view it, Hendrik will take you through that later on, or can do online and that sort of thing. One of the two things, some of our success stories, about this time last year we were awarded £60,000 from the Local Government Association to do some work on establishing open data websites. And we've just been very recently awarded another 120k from the Cabinet Office to carry on that work. So then, if you like, we're getting support at a national level for the sort of work that we're doing and the sort of line about trying to encourage openness and promote open data here in Cambridgeshire. We're getting national support for that. We're starting work on the spend for that 120k and using some of that money to unlock new and interesting data sets about the county. And we've got a Cabinet Office visit coming up, and we'll be doing some conferencing around that sort of issue as well. So we're getting that sort of level of recognition. The usage figures for Cambridgeshire Insight is going up and up. The other element which is worth looking at is some of these user stories, and I love the fact we've got a lot of people coming on the site, grabbing what they want and vanishing. You never know what on earth they're wanting the information for. But you also get a little bit of insight from some of this stuff by questions people ask you. And they drop into our inbox. This is somebody sort of saying, I've contacted you as an artist, I'm putting a bid together, and we do a lot of work with people wanting to bring money into the area and demonstrate what the need for particular projects. And this person wants information to back a bid for a health and wellbeing project in the Abbey area of Cambridge. We've got somebody else here who's got money to spend. This person was from Groundwork, the Groundwork Trust. And they had money to spend in Cambridge and wanted to spend that money in improving the grounds of schools in deprived areas. So there you go, that's a particular query they were popping in and trying to do that. somebody doing research on affordable housing stock and how affordable housing was in Cambridgeshire. This is a good one. Most commonly spoken languages in Cambridgeshire. When you think about all the most controversial issues at the moment, particularly in the political spectrum, those are this issue around migration. People are all sorts of, it's a hot topic here in Cambridgeshire as it is nationally, and we get a lot of questions about migration. So what's the truth about migration? We do try and answer that through some of the content of the website. It's then how you interpret those figures and your views about those figures is then where if you like, the politics shows. But we're at least trying to put the right information, the right figures out there. It's a good thing. Somebody else was doing a project with families in Cambridge, wanted to know what the audience were, what the size of the audience for their particular project. Another person doing housing work on stock condition surveys. This one I love. This is somebody who worked in a children's centre. I wonder if you can help us. We are, after knowing postcodes per super output area, Ofsted are requiring more and more information to filter down. We're feeding the government machine. Can you help us out? That sort of thing. They've also been looking. This is somebody who's working on a village hall website and saying, actually, I want to help with that village hall website and that side of things. So, what we're doing is trying to be as open as possible with the information that we've got, and we're seeing that really good success with what we're doing. What we're also trying to do is hang on to that philosophy of trying to be as open as possible, and hang on to that idea that is everything secret? The answer is no, it isn't. Is anything secret in local government? Probably not, because we're trying to retain that kernel of truth that we are a local accountable organisation, and we want to stick with that as much as we can. That's all I wanted to say this evening. I'm going to ask if there's any questions.
Have you heard of Mapumental, which is a mySociety project?
What's that one, sorry?
It's called Mapumental.
Yeah.
And I just thought that it's something perhaps you should look at if you've not heard of it, because it's someone else might be able to actually describe it better than I can. But it's a travel time mapping
that's the
site.
one. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
When you mention things like the post office work, it seems like it might be something that you could use.
Absolutely.
We're doing something very like that for the Welsh Assembly.
And if somebody you go on, you can say, well, I live here.
For accessibility by public transport.
It's saying, I live here. Can I get to my? Why can I get?
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's being used by. So it sounds like it's being used by your contemporaries in Wales at the moment to do work on things like are deprived areas served well.
What you do get actually within local atmosphere is people going, actually, I really want to work and have access to some of these web tools out here. I don't want to use what's on my traditional desktop. I want to go out into and use the tools, some of the interesting tools that other people are putting out and about. Has anybody else has experience of going in and looking at Cambridgeshire Insight and looking at the website? I'd always encourage people to go and have a look, just purely look at the range and the richness of data that's available about the county. We're particularly open to people's ideas about, as Richard said, have you seen this? Would you like to put this on the site? And that sort of thing. Because we are trying to grow it organically. And we started off as a small site and we're trying to grow it up from sort of taking little bits of funding away that were available from other research projects, just to feed the overall site and the idea that we're going to work as a team, work as in that open way as possible.
So I think one thing that's interesting on there that you mentioned is postcodes per lower super output area. That's lower, I've inserted the lower in there, per super output area. And this really relates to things that Peter was talking about before, in that what we've got here is something that's exceptionally useful that everybody who's making any kind of website that involves a map almost always needs, is access to addresses. And yet we've managed to silo it off in something that has to be paid for and where somebody somehow owns the copyright of.
Absolutely. I mean, in effect, that's been privatised.
Exactly. It's gone with the post office. And the addresses have gone. Postcodes we've sort of got a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are people who are particularly expert at understanding the copyright restrictions around map data, and what the Ordnance Survey produces, what the OS stuff is in the public realm, isn't in the public realm, the different elements of things like the postcode address file, the National Property Gazetteer, and a whole range of other things. It's becoming quite a complicated minefield to negotiate. And part of the reason behind that is because with the shrinking public purse, organisations like mine and like it on a national level, I'm thinking, is there anything, what assets have we got and what we can hang on to as a commercial asset? It's interesting the fact that the postcode files went off with the post office privatisation.
Yeah, it's not the postcodes. Mark was sort of correcting me there that we sort of did get the postcode, but we didn't get the addresses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where you go from there. Any other questions?
I was just going to say that, I mean, the postcodes, if I understand right, were originally nothing to do with the sort of uses they're being put to now. They were for delivering things called letters, right? Okay, which we have a few of. But there is this general problem that if you get third parties to implement things for you, you've got to be very careful that you don't end up with them owning intellectual property in the thing you've paid them. So I think the state of Georgia in the US does not own its own laws. The laws belong to a company which has drafted the laws, and the copyright actually says that the laws belong to this company.
Well, we have a similar kind of situation with court judgments here, of course.
Right, absolutely. So, we need to be much clearer that if we're acting in the public interest, we're not giving away rights to people who are, facilitating part of the process.
Yeah.
I mean, if I may, we experience the same restrictions because we can't give stuff to people who actually need it. One of my biggest headaches for 10 years is actually working through the copyrights and licensing and everything else for everyone else. I've got another hat on, which is I'm a member of the Open Data User Group, who fought really hard to try and keep those postal addresses as part of, but unfortunately they lost that one. But the second one they're fighting this year is actually the suppliers owning the data for public services that they're providing services to. And government procurement services now have recommendations that public sector can include in contracts that actually saying the public sector actually owns their own data. And coming back to some of the points you were raising with regards to open data being owned by actually private industries, it's actually potentially going to be a huge issue unless people take action, and people are trying to take action against this.
And it's an issue we've known about for a long time as well, and yet failed to fix.
And a lot of contracts with regards to, I know central government's a similar issue, are long-term contracts where they're locked into, and particularly with regards to rights of their own data. So for instance, what we're trying to do at the moment is release data, be it transport APIs or various rights of way information, etc. As part of that's a technical issue, part of it's a copyright issue, and also part of it is actually an energy issue and resources issue, in the fact that the person who used to do this is now gone. Now someone is triple jobbing it, and actually it's non-statutory, but we're trying to release the value and get them to understand to release the value, and not just the public sector, by the way. Cambs for Insight is a partnership site, so we have people like Citizens Advice Bureau on board, Cambridge SCVS, and actually what we're trying to do is essentially together try and release some of these data sets that organisations either know or don't know that they have locked within themselves, and actually potentially getting to see the value of it and putting the context on it. I mean, I think a really good example from, I think, Peterborough about 2 years ago was the NHS paid the City Council additional money to grid certain areas that they hotspot cluster map with regards to where previously there was falls and hip replacements. Now, a bit of grit is a lot cheaper than actually doing a full hip replacement. And those kind of solutions with regards to communities and organisations looking at things in a smarter way, and actually particularly when there's less resources, and actually how we can do that together. And there's plenty of solutions out there. I mean, we've mentioned some already with regards to OpenStreetMap and Fix My Street and etc. And actually working together on these kind of things is really a solution that we're looking at going down the road.
OpenStreetMap's quite an important thing there with effectively the addresses. There was a tweet from Steve Coast from OpenStreetMap saying that sort of the big next project should be freeing address endpoints.
There was also an announcement today.
So that could be quite interesting.
The ODI Summit was on today, and they've announced, I think, 15 million for open data projects. And also, secondly, there was an announcement, just on the way in, I saw a tweet coming out, something around funding for the open address database.
Yeah, which is really funny, isn't it, given that this is coming from government that's just sold it. We now have to fund breaking it free again.
But for all these things, if there's not a direct solution, we're trying to find a workaround. So if anyone has any suggestions, please do come to us, because we are genuinely trying to do something really positive here. And at this point we're in talks with a number of different organisations and individuals about releasing their data. And the example I always like to give is Leeds have a data mill. And they've done everything from footfall in the city centre for the Tour de France, which people don't, what do I need that for? Well, if 100 people pass your shop every hour and you get one customer an hour, why can't you get two? You know, or stuff like they've got now some of the bigger companies signed up, which I personally was very surprised to see, people like Yorkshire Water or some of the power companies, who again in the past it's been commercially sensitive information. So it's some really positive signs being made in different pockets of the country and also nationally as well. And there is best practice out there, and just need to sort of follow it.
Got a question to both of you, actually, kind of following up from that. Is part of the challenge you're facing now, you kind of had your slide about moving from supplying a certain data set to a central government SAR to supplying a very diverse user group. You must have to try and quantify the value that you're giving to all these people, from the very onesie twosie to the very high sophisticated users. That sounds really difficult. How are you going about that?
Number one question we get from people is, what's the benefit of doing this?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, Mike mentioned some of the funding we've been successful on. So we're managed to take the lead, say to people, well actually we can do it for you first time and show you and get the process going. And then hopefully we can identify the benefits. This is not just a local issue either, it's a national issue with regards, particularly with open data, is identifying those benefits. So a good example is the FOI requests. There's no hard evidence that I'm aware of, which we may disagree on this, but there's been some sort of anecdotal stuff that the more FOIs that go out, then more complex FOIs come in. So I mean, I know a lot of organisations are looking at making FOI requests open data and standard feeds and everything else. And there's no simple solution to this point until we can actually quantify those benefits, be that it's greater efficiencies or greater use of resources or essentially greater savings. It's something we're trying to work at. The Open Data User Group, for anyone who hasn't seen it, published 50 case studies this year. And there's quite a good and quite a breadth, be it from private sector to public sector. And some of those are great examples for actually how data can be used. But I think really the next step is how that data can be used and the impact that it's had.
What happens next, yeah.
From our perspective, one big project we have now this year is developing some of those user stories and developing into case studies. Not scientific papers, case studies of actually what people have used data for, what was the use and what was the output. And by the way, if you've produced something new, then actually let's publish it.
The other element of that is also not necessarily just releasing data for the hell of it or releasing information for the hell of it. If we're doing a particular research project, one of the recent ones I'm working on is the extent of repeat victimisation and the extent of people are being repeat victims of crime and that sort of thing. Yes, I'm working on that because I've got a commission to work on that report and I can produce the report. It's then working in an open way, so some of the data and the spreadsheet, not all the data on that sort of level, it's highly sensitive, but some of the spreadsheets behind that would release alongside that, so people can look behind the report and go, oh, there's some interesting stuff. They might throw light on their local area, for example, or something along those lines, and the extent of repeat victimisation, in their neighbourhood. Neighbourhood level, there's no problem in releasing that data probably. You look at the numbers and that sort of thing. So that's the idea. Some of this is think about working openly. So as you work and added value, and because you say yes, I've got the value of producing a report, and that's gone to the relevant commissioner or decision maker. But at the same time, I then put that out into the public realm. What I can into the public realm that then enables as much reuse as possible. And that's probably nothing unusual. People work more in the academic, scientific research areas. We've been doing some stuff like that for years. But in terms of local government, you've got to focus on. I've got the report, it's done, without thinking about working openly around that. So that's the other way of doing it. You justify it saying, as I said, with that list of user stories, I've met the needs of that primary audience, but I'm also thinking about all the other people.
Also, in line with that, one of the things we're attempting is that any data sets we publish have Open Data Institute certification against them. Yeah. And for those who haven't seen it, each line that you enter with that can be questioned and can be crowd verified to come back to a full feedback loop. So again, from that perspective, being open about the data is one thing, being open about every element of the data is another, and that could be technical, legal, general, descriptive, and that's all there. So for all the pilot data sets that we've run, I think we've got 14 data sets or something like 30 odd pieces of data that have come out from the original scoping exercise we did, where we went out and asked people what they wanted. they're all certified. And our hope to move forward with now is actually to get more people moving forward with that data and actually taking some of the feedback we've had from that and actually trying to improve what we have.
There must be quite a number of interest groups that are disadvantaged by releasing all this data. How much do you run up against them and how much trouble do they cause you?
So
There must be, for example, those whose power base is reduced by a more wide dissemination of data, or those silos who generate the data and think they might be able to make money out of it to the detriment of the country in general. Just to think of two possible groups that might be significantly against your attempts.
The monetarising thing, I only really run up against is a sort of internal dialogue within somewhere like the county council, really, because the public purse is under such pressure. Or could we sell this data set? In actual fact, we're not the sort of organisation that's really set up to commercially exploit data sets. And and much of what we got, if we were going out and trying to commercially exploit some of the data we got, it would take us, months and years to get in a position to be able to do it, and then it's probably not a game that's not worth the candle. The other thing is, you're right to some extent, there are people who don't necessarily approve of the development of alternative narratives, if you like. An alternative narrative, there might be a formal narrative, where if we've got the data, we can manage the formal narrative through committee reports or whatever have you, and that's a narrative we have control with, and we'll maintain that narrative all the way through, and restrict it to us being the only one telling the story, because we're the only people who've got access to the background data. And you're right, that is somewhere where you can run up against, particularly within particular organisations that are sensitive, particularly around difficult decisions that they're trying to make. Undermining that a little bit, if to be honest with you, that's a lot of concerns that are generated locally. The push to be much more open and the encouragement we get comes from a national level. The funding we get comes from a national level. Some of the really big movements and that sort of thing come from a national level. And that has proved very helpful to overcoming whatever local internal opposition there may be to releasing data and releasing other information that's available. But it's small opposition, really, and it's more born out the Jeremy Clarkson sort of kind of scenario that I put up there. Is they're like, can people be trusted with the information you're putting out? And I've had that question posed to me by some people who've worked in local government research, all their lives, and saying, well, if I'm not there as a local government researcher to interpret the information we're putting out, then people are going to misinterpret it. Let them. But you find actually that correction, Richard referred to it a little bit, that correction happens very quickly online and in the open environment as well. So the opposition does exist, but it's kind of small. I've not come across any great problems really so far. And the other thing we have to kind of think about is the push to release open data isn't just about transparency either.
Yep.
Because a lot of people in local government think about open data as it's about how much money we spend and all our expenditure over £500 and all the individual items, how much money senior managers are paid, how much what the expenses. But for us, the open data element is actually much wider than transparency and fits more.
So I wanted to pursue this aspect. In my area of the Hargreaves reform, there was definitely a feeling that the government wanted to see estimates of wealth generation and so on is a very common term in what they want. Has anybody got any even very loose formulae for calculating what the value of open is in monetary terms? In the same way, for example, a life is worth, what is it, £500,000 or something of that sort. You will know. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But if we could come up with an accounting formula that says a piece of open data is worth something or other, then you can feed it. So I've done it with I got that bit with the human genome. Now it's fallacious because it wasn't the only thing that generated that money, but clearly I push that at any politician I've got. This is what open data did, and see what the enormous downstream wealth was. Rufus Pollock did this some years ago with open map data and said that if the map data was open in the UK, then you'd have a multiplier effect of about 5, that we get a income to UK PLC of 500 million as opposed to 100 million to the Ordnance Survey. Now, I just wonder, are people getting these sorts of figures because it's what politicians seem to like?
Yeah, I mean, we've had to develop various case studies over the years where we've used, Professor Paul Foley came up with an equation a couple of years ago that we used in the potential savings for. No one really locally accepted figures anyway, because they were hundreds of thousands they were telling us. Also, I mean, I know the Association for Geographic Information, similar to Rufus, they've come up with quite big figures for both open and geospatial data. And then I think I'm throwing around acronyms here, let us know tomorrow, sorry. EPSI, which is the European Open Data Portal, have various information around how much open data and geospatial data is going to be worth to the European economy, and they're throwing around billions as well. So you're right, on a local level, we need to get better to identify the value, but I think it goes across sector as well, is that for us to do it as the starting point and then someone else to see the benefit of it, be that a social, financial or environmental benefit, we need to get better at the whole business model sort of things. Do you have anything on that?
No, only other than in terms of trying to put as much as possible online, we're also sort of living up to what we call the digital first agenda within the county council.
Yeah.
Where we're trying as much as possible to change the way we deal with and contact and engage with customers. So if we can deal with them online or digitally first, and then that saves us much more money compared to a telephone contact, compared to a face-to-face contact, compared to an email. You know, if people are coming onto the site, finding what they want and going away, fine, I don't have to answer any queries for them, therefore that saves me, I don't know, £2 or whatever for every person that comes along, self-serves and goes away, compared to having to answer those questions. And they're also with that sort of channel shift and questions of value around that side of things. The other way of thinking about it is also in terms of value taken from streamlining processes and that side of things, which is another debate entirely. But you're right, politicians absolutely at the moment, because the public purse in particular, you know, county council, local government, we're not on our own, as I say, nationally the public purse is under such funding pressure. The idea to demonstrate economic value to the work you're doing is actually absolutely fundamental. You do come up with this though. I've had a colleague talking about we get into the financial costs of crime, and somebody saying, oh well, you know, I want to, you know, I'm fighting to maintain some posts within the county council's domestic violence advocacy service. You know, so if I avoid however many domestic violence incidents, how much money have I saved? And of course, once you get into that sort of thing, you think, well, hang on, you want to avoid domestic violence because it's a good thing to do. You know, you don't want to really take your financial argument all the way down that particular road. It's just the right thing to do in some cases. You have to think about that sort of thing. You shouldn't have to make a financial case on that sort of basis for some things. But yeah, the financial considerations do come into a lot of what we do. You know, carry on, you know, make your business case, make your business case.
In terms of your sand pits,
Yeah.
I mean, as well as the data, you presumably have, like, you know, software tools for doing data analysis. I mean, how much is that part of the picture of like making things open?
Do you want
Well, with regards to open source, or
Yeah, or, you know, do you point people at recommended tools, or do you just say?
funny you say that. We have open source and proprietary tools like any organisation that we use, and to my knowledge, I don't think there's anything we use that most open source tools can't replicate. So, for instance, we have a GIS system called MapInfo. QGIS is an open source GIS system which is just as capable as MapInfo. The ODI have published a list of recommended open source data analysis tools, and everything from the geographic information system side of things to relational databases to semantic web to things like statistics like R. I can send a link around if it's any use, because it's actually a really, really useful list of stuff they've reviewed and gone through for that purpose. Is that what you mean, Robin? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking, what you'd ideally like is like everything to be web-based, and say, oh, I've got this data source from this site here, and mySociety, and I'll mash it up and it'll produce some
okay,
wonderful visualization. But
on our open data set,
life is never that simple.
this doesn't sound like a huge leap to this room, but to us it was quite a big leap. We have data APIs now, and what we're working with is open source code, something called DCAN. So the Open Knowledge Foundation do something called CCAN, and it's the Drupal version of CCAN. Essentially, it's a Drupal module that bolts on. So it's all open source, all replicable, and as of last week, they have launched their DCAN Migrate database, which allows, in theory, it's still being tested, to talk to CCAN sites. So again, with regards to replicable, you should be able to do the same thing with regards to pull that data or push it out as well. And the whole idea with ourselves is, by the way, and everything that we publish is duplicated on data.gov.uk, so searchable there and findable there, is that we publish once and it gets replicated a number of times, and then vice versa. So we're hoping to save ourselves some work from that perspective. But then secondly as well is that to be as open as possible. So I mean, originally we were going for this near mantra of, you know, open data, open communication, open source. And what we haven't done yet is publish the code on GitHub, but it was something I've been with today. I only found out what GitHub was about 2 months ago, so give me some time. But from that perspective, and in the intro, if there's any questions, please just come on to us now.
Thanks. We're going to have to leave it there because we have to tidy up.